Hi, everybody. Welcome to VanillaSoft's webinar, What the Heck Are Aged Leads and Why Should I Care? My name is Bergen Wild. I'm the head of product marketing at VanillaSoft, and I'm really excited about the topic this week because I haven't a clue what aged leads are and why I'd want to get them. When I hear aged anything, I kind of think aged cheese or aged wine, and these are all good things. I really like an aged cheddar that's 5 years old. I like an aged wine. Aged leads seems like it goes against the grain of everything we're taught in sales to jump on a lead while it's fresh, while it's hot. You need to get on that order right as fast as you can. I'm in marketing, and one of the things we're always trying to do is make sure that as a web lead comes in, we're delivering it to the sales team as quickly as possible. We come back from trade shows, although not these days, and want to make sure we get those leads in the hand of our sales team as quickly as possible so they can follow up while the prospect is still thinking about things, is still in that mindset, is still, in essence, shopping. So age seems a little bit weird. And so today I've invited Bill Rice on, who's an expert in this, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how you can build a book of business from an aged lead. So here we go. But before we get into talking about that and I introduce you to Bill, let's go over some of the ground rules first. So this webinar is going to be recorded. Don't worry about it. So there's really good stuff in here. You can always come back and reference later. You don't need to take notes. Sit back, listen, absorb, and come back later when we send you the follow-up link to the recording in about 24 hours or so. I'd like to point out, though, that this is always going to be available on the VanillaSoft.com website. You can go to our resources section and find this webinar plus other webinars about sales training, sales tools, other sales training tips and techniques are all there, as well as others that are focused exclusively on insurance to help you become a better insurance sales agent or run your agency a little bit better. So now you're also in listen-only mode. All right, so you can't talk to us during the webinar, but we would love to hear from you anyway. You can still send any comments or questions you have via a tweet to @VanillaSoft, and we'll be monitoring that and answering. There's also a chat window on the right, and you can put in your comments there, and we will be answering as best we can through the webinar. We have people that are there to help and answer some of your questions as we go along. Let's get started here. So our guest is Bill Rice. He is the founder and CEO of Kaleido. It is a digital agency that's focused on lead generation. He is an expert on lead generation. I'm really happy to have him here. He's a writer about it. He's a speaker about it. And he knows about lead generation systems, which I think is very important. So he knows about the technology, and he knows about the processes to help make sure that you're successful in following through on those leads and turning them into revenue. So even better for us, he's got a particular focus in the insurance industry and on technology. So he knows this subject extremely well, and he knows about it specifically for you. You can always find him on the Aged Lead Store webinar. Just sign up at the agedleadstore.com newsletter, and they will update you when the next one is. They have them a couple of times a month. Lots of good, fabulous information there about how to manage your leads. So with all that said, Bill, welcome to our webinar.
Thanks, Bergen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited again, like I said, about today's topic. Let's just go through quickly what we're going to cover here. And maybe you can give us a bit of a rundown of what's on the menu here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to sort of just kick off with, and because a lot of people haven't really heard of age leads, a lot of people have heard of internet leads, have heard of, talk about leads all the time. But like I said, what the heck are age leads? That's usually the first question that we get asked is, what are these things? Of course, we want to talk about the benefits, how you can incorporate these into your sales processes to be a part of your overall sales strategy and plan. Invariably, with any type of marketing or sales technique, there are some downsides. So we're going to talk kind of through the downsides that might be included in this, just to be kind of clear and transparent as to what you would be actually working in this channel. Of course, how to be successful with them. There's all kinds of techniques and tactics that are really important to this particular category of leads. And then also, where do you actually get them from? How do you find them? How do you get a good, reputable provider of aged leads? And then we'll kind of close out with just a few additional tips of kind of using this particular lead type in your overall sales plan.
Awesome. Great. We're looking forward to this again. Like I said, uh, the first question, of course, though, is, and this is my question up the top, is what the heck are aged leads? How are they different from other leads? How are they different from fresh leads, I guess? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and then that's really kind of the best place to start. I mean, for the most part, kind of the simplest definition of age leads is they're simply, for most providers, they are actually internet leads, real-time internet leads, as most of you have probably been introduced to or thought about maybe buying or have actually worked real-time internet leads that are just a little bit older. And like I said, that's kind of the simplest intuitive definition. Those real-time leads have actually been originated and have been kind of put into the market, or the customer has made an inquiry, asked for a rate quote, and then there has been some time that has gone by, and now those are considered aged leads. And as a result, they have quite a difference in price point based on what I always characterize as perceived value. And we can kind of talk about how that may or may not be. The other thing that's kind of really important to understand, if we were to get into kind of the underlying sort of how the lead business works, and usually also the number one question that we get, or probably the number two question that we get, is how many times were these sold? So in the lead generation business, particularly with real-time internet leads, the marketing company, so you can think of people like Quote Wizard or some of the other insurance lead companies that are out there that you may have bought real-time leads. They tell the consumer that they are going to match them with a couple different insurance agents so that they can compare and shop. And that's really the value proposition that most of the real-time lead providers give to the consumer. That creates the opportunity for that lead to be sold 3, 4, 5 times. But oftentimes the supply and demand isn't perfectly matched. So maybe that lead company can only sell it 1 or 2 times. And as a result of that, there are some additional opportunities to sell that, but they don't sell it in real time. And so then it creates an opportunity for that lead to be sold later, but it doesn't have the same value. So it becomes aged. And so that is sort of the other reason that there is this market for aged lead, is because just simply that lead doesn't get provided to enough agents or providers for a variety of reasons, and creates an opportunity for that lead to be sold later as an aged lead. Or to your story at the beginning of aged cheese and wine, sometimes they're called vintage. So
Oh, there, there we go. Vintage. Terrific. How long then before a lead becomes vintage, say? I mean, what am I talking about? Are we talking about days, weeks, months? When is a lead considered to be aged?
yeah, generally, well, and again, this varies from real-time provider to real-time provider, but generally, a buyer of a real-time lead expects that that lead was generated within the last 24 to 48 hours. So a lead ages very quickly, and if you've worked real-time leads. In any sort of sales team, your sales manager is probably on you, like you're going to answer that in 30 seconds. So just within that context, as a salesperson, if you've ever worked real-time leads, the perceived value of that real-time lead and the premium that you pay for it is literally within moments. And so generally a lead is categorized as aged if the consumer provided their data, filled out a form, or made an inbound call anytime longer than 24 to 48 hours, then it's considered
Okay.
aged.
And is that sort of standard across the industry, or is that particular to insurance? I'm just curious, is it
Uh,
different depending on what industry you're in?
No, that's pretty much throughout verticals, and that's even getting kind of like tighter in the sense that more and more popular is really the live transfer, which again is even one level more expensive. So more and more when people are saying, "Hey, I want to buy a real-time lead," actually their expectation is that you're going to transfer them a consumer on a phone call or active on the line. And so yeah, it's that margin is getting shorter and shorter as to the expectation.
All right. That is short. So, okay, so you mentioned something too in there, and that kind of brings us to our next topic a little bit. In terms of what are the benefits of these leads, because one of the things that this flies in the face of conventional sales wisdom, right? And you mentioned
Mhm.
that a little bit. You got sales managers that are saying you need to call them in 30 seconds, especially this new lead comes in and it's supposed to be a hot, fresh lead. The last thing you want to do is have it sit there. You want to call it strike while the iron's hot. You're that, you got to get them while they're in the line looking at that candy bar before they get into their car, because it's going to be a lot harder to get them out of that car to come back in to buy the candy bar.
Yeah.
So, what are the benefits then of these aged leads when, everyone's telling me you should really be focusing on these fresh leads because they're the ones that convert?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the best place to start when you're talking about the benefits of age leads is maybe some of the drawbacks of the real-time lead. And when you're buying a real-time lead at 15 to $25 a lead, if you're talking about live transfers, actual phone calls, you're in the 50 on up to 75, $90 a lead. The investment there is so large that there is a lot of pressure. The competition that you're up against is under that same pressure. So everybody's calling, within 30 seconds. We've already talked about the cost that's there. And one of the interesting parts about that, and kind of the misconception often about, or the expectations around a real-time lead, is that because I'm buying it in real time and I'm actually calling it the moment that person fills out the form or made the phone call, our general belief, which I don't think is accurate, is that if we do call them in a matter of moments, we will actually close a sale. And actually, what all the research shows you, and I'm not advocating not calling, you do have to call it immediately. What all the research actually shows you is it gives you the highest probability of pulling that consumer into your pipeline and beginning a process that will go towards a purchase. And there's again, that assumes some other things go right, but calling them within 30 seconds, which is terribly critical, is really just to pull them into your pipeline versus them continuing to kind of shop around. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to actually close the deal any faster than your normal sales cycle. So that kind of leads into the benefit of the age leads. So during that sort of real-time process, what actually often happens with that consumer is they get overwhelmed. A lot of times their need does actually get satisfied, so that's a good thing. But when all that pressure happens to the consumer, a lot of times the consumer will just back away from the process. And so what an age lead actually allows you to do, and some of the main benefits, is one, it's far more affordable. Your average age lead between 0 and 30, less than 90, and we can kind of talk about the time scale there, probably averages around $1 a lead. So right there's just like a multiples a difference in price. Typically, because there is some time period, the average real-time lead, the follow-up ends about 10 days in, even for the most aggressive and kind of refined shops, probably stop following up on that lead after about 10 days. The other big, so you're competing less. The other big benefit is when you're figuring out your sales quota and you're figuring out your conversion rate, oftentimes if you actually do the math, and I encourage people to do this, put a spreadsheet together and say, hey, if I need to make this many, if I need to close this many deals so that I can reach this commission rate, and then I back up the sort of the funnel and the conversion rates that I have, do I have enough leads? And most time people will find out that they absolutely do not have enough leads, nor could they afford to buy enough real-time leads to actually physically hit the quota that they've set for themselves. And so the other really big benefit is, because they are affordable, is you can simply get the volume of opportunities and sort of at bats you need to make that quota. The other thing that we find they often get used for, and therefore there's a benefit around them, is training. Or just simply being able to build an initial book of business. Again, has a lot to do with the affordability and the volume there. So those are kind of the key benefits. Affordability, you're no longer competing with all the other real-time folks that were on this lead originally. You can actually afford to get the volume that you need. And then certainly if training is part of that equation, you can get, again, enough at bats to kind of get good at what you're doing.
It's interesting you mentioned the top of funnel and making sure your funnel is even big enough. And I hadn't thought of that. And I knew that was a
Yeah.
challenge when I was a sales rep. I struggled with that as well, right? And so it's interesting to think that, yeah, I need to have more coming through for it to filter down to make sure that I'm going to be successful, especially, when, as I'm sure you're going to illuminate for us, these leads, just because they're aged doesn't mean they have no value. And if they're worked properly, you can get that value out of it, and actually you can increase your pipeline. You're not just filling stuff in there to show your boss, hey, look how much I've got coming down the pipe. Eventually, this is all going to be really good. You're not just sort of fluffing things up to make it look good. Uh, and I had another question a little bit for you in here as well. You're going to talking about the training and using them for training, and I guess, and maybe this comes down to a matter of process. Uh,
Mhm.
it always struck me as odd that you would give aged leads to trainees. On the one hand, I get it, they can just practice calling and stuff. But if they get someone or they start to communicate with somebody, that opportunity, it could be someone who's got 8 kids, so they need a really big insurance policy to provide for them should they pass away. And a brand new lead might be someone who's a bachelor and has no kids, no dependents, and only needs enough money to cover the funeral. So the opportunity, isn't necessarily dictated by the age of the lead. So I'm just curious,
Mm.
how does that really work in the training? Because it seems to me a bit of an odd thing, other than that they're cheaper and there's more of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you probably hit it. I mean, I think that's why they have a tendency to get used in training more often, just because of the risk and the cost of them. Because truly, you know, uh, and we say this over and over again. I mean, an age lead really is no different than a real-time lead, other than kind of the point at which it was actually submitted, right, and the proximity to your call or your outreach to when they actually submitted, and theoretically when their intent maybe was the highest to entertain your phone call or your email or your text message, and we'll talk about some of those techniques in a second. But yeah, within that lead file, there's as likely to be a really big deal as there is in real time. There's really no difference, and we talk about this all the time. There's really not a lot of research that tells you that there's any more likelihood of closing the actual deal on a real-time lead as there is an age lead, or to have a bigger account come through real-time leads versus what will come through an age lead. And in fact, there may be some reason to believe that an age lead might actually hold a higher likelihood of closing because they've worked through a period of time, which oftentimes there's one quote that I like to pull out a lot is there was a research done by CSO Insights around kind of the consumer when they come and they submit that form or they make that call to engage a salesperson. And based on that research, they said that 70% of the people that actually engaged a salesperson, filled out a form, made a phone call, had already made a decision to purchase or had already made a decision for the solution. So that means that most of those leads at some time, and there's all kinds of other studies that back this up, there's a pretty good chance that that lead, once it comes in, as a real-time lead or an age lead, it's going to eventually close. So if, only about 10% of those real-time leads close, there's another 90% that at some point are going to close somewhere. They just didn't close within that real time frame, and so there's all kinds of opportunity there. So to kind of go back and give the short answer to that, I think they get used for training because they're much cheaper than risking a $20 lead on a brand new person. Is that the way you should use them? Maybe not necessarily.
Yeah. So let's be clear then, and maybe you can help me with this. It seems to me then really the premium that you're paying for when you buy a real-time lead isn't so much that it's a better lead per se. It's still got it's the greater chance that you'll be able to hook that lead into your sales funnel and have them talking to you as the, say, the authority or the partner through their journey to buy insurance than anybody else. Is that accurate to say that that's what I'm paying anywhere from $14 to $29 more for?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. There's really kind of two haircuts that happen on an age lead, which does, arguably take down the value significantly, right? There's a percentage, let's say it's 10% or so, of those people that will actually um, do a deal with the person who kind of calls them first, right? So let's say your conversion rate on real-time leads is 10%. So 10% of that data file is quite, and this kind of gets into the downside, which we're going to talk about in a second. There's a good percentage that is a good reason to believe that about 10% of those, the need's already been satisfied, right? Because they were kind of captured in that real-time moment. So that's sort of a benefit to the real time. The other thing that is a benefit, potentially to the real time is exactly what you said. You get the first opportunity to pull them into your sales process, into your pipeline, and nurture them to the sale that you hope to do. And there's a lot of work that does, and I know, VanillaSoft is good at that. Your CRM system and the nurturing processes that you build in there are actually, moving that person step by step through to your ideal sort of buying process. And so by the time you get to that conversation of closing the deal, they know who you are. They've nurtured through your process. You probably satisfied some objections along the way as you've kind of touched them and followed up with them. And so they've been through your sales process. And so by the time you sort of get to that final moment when you're converting them into an actual sale or into a policy, they're kind of bought in to some degree. Whereas, again, with an age lead, you're picking them up from a lot of different places, and that takes some talent and some systems. This is where systems comes into play with age leads. You could be picking them up from being overwhelmed by the real-time process. You could pick them up from being dropped by someone who didn't follow up. You could pick them up from a situation where maybe they weren't qualified, or they didn't fit, or they couldn't get what they were looking for, or maybe you're picking them up from a place of just simple indecision. They weren't able to sort of make a decision and it didn't close. So whereas the real-time lead, you're kind of getting them, you're kind of working through all those objections and then get to move them forward on your nurturing path. Age leads, you kind of got to pick them up and sort of figure out where they're at. And so there is, there are definitely some value propositions to real-time leads, but oftentimes probably the biggest barrier is just the budget, right? Most people just
Sure.
can't afford to buy enough real-time leads.
Okay, so I mean, let's start talking then a little bit about our next big question here, and what's the downside then to choosing this path? What are the gotchas, the snags, the things that are going to cause this to maybe be a little bit extra work, perhaps, to get these leads to come through for you?
Yeah, I think it's really important. If you're considering age leads, which I think everybody should, just again, it helps you to build that book of business, that database that's so important to any salesperson, just to give them enough at bats to be able to hit that quota consistently. There are going to be some drawbacks to that because of the age, right? So we've talked about a few of those, right? There's a good chance in your data file, because they have been sold before. Any age lead provider that tells you that they're exclusive and they haven't been sold before and they're selling them to you for $1 a piece, red flags should go up, right? So all internet leads, all real-time leads, almost without exception, cost can kind of tell you the difference there, because a lot of people say they're exclusive, but they're really not. They're generally not. So there's a percentage of that data file where the consumer's need will already have been met. One of the reasons they're so popular in insurance, though, as all of your agents will know, is essentially consumers are always in the market for insurance. There's always a way or a conversation or a product that could either be given to the consumer for a slightly lower premium, or potentially they can bundle and give some cost savings, or maybe there's a bit of insurance that belongs inside of that person's overall financial profile that's not there right now. So all that goes to say that even if their need has been satisfied, I think age leads are really popular in insurance, because unlike mortgage, where you may do that once every 5 or 10 years, insurance literally the day somebody sells you an auto insurance policy, you could talk to them, a couple weeks later, bundle their home and auto and give them savings, right? And so although we say, hey, a percentage has already met the need, then that's kind of mitigated a little bit because of the insurance market. The other things that's important to understand about your age lead data file is oftentimes emails are changed and phone numbers change. These are some really interesting statistics too, as to kind of, again, setting good expectations here. So emails being changed and phone numbers being changed sometimes are a product of the process. So the real-time lead experience, all these people getting pounded on and jumped on, can lead to some of these individuals changing their email or phone number. So there's always going to be a component of that. Most of the age lead providers, or at least the good ones, are going to do some data verification and some hygiene to kind of improve that. So that the quality of those emails at least contact. And so that's really important. And we'll talk a little bit about finding age leads in a second. But there will be a percentage that have potentially changed. In the category of email, it's really important to understand what's really going on there most often, and why email is definitely a component of your outreach. It shouldn't be the only component, because the average person now, based on statistics, has about 2.5 emails. So what do you think that means? That means they've got an email for these kind of things, and then they've got an email that they pay attention to. So oftentimes
Guilty.
one or the other. Yeah, exactly. So people have done that. So it's important when you're building your system to understand the role that email plays. Phone, this one's really important. Although people do have a tendency to change their phone number, that has drawn down dramatically with the portability of numbers. And the fact that phone numbers have almost become an identity. And this is why text messages are so important as part of that. And then probably the last one, well, actually two more real quick. They are probably outside of in what I call the intent window. So when they originally submitted, that's when they were thinking about it. 30 days later, 60 days later, 90 days later, they might not be thinking as much about a rate quote as they were then. And then the last thing is, you just need a system, because you're working with a lot more volume. So the worst thing that people can do with an age lead data file is to buy 1,000 age leads, and the expectation is that the only thing they're going to do is call through that, because again, probably half or more of that list is really not paying attention to the need for a rate quote right now. So you need a system to kind of begin to nurture them again.
Right. Yeah. They're going to be definitely something that's going to, as you said, you have to nurture a lot of these people and make them and keep them, make sure that you're top of mind when, again, because insurance comes around for them again, whether it's, again, they bought a new car or a new home, or they've changed jobs, or baby was born, or whatever the case may be. Life changes brings lots of insurance requirement changes, doesn't it? All right, so let's move on to the next spot, because you've introduced it a little bit already in talking about the systems, and really this is obviously the core of it, right? So, okay, we've talked about whether they're good, they're bad, how so, what to look for in terms of the leads you're getting, and how to work age leads, though, is really the next step. How am I going to make sure that I am successful using aged leads? And I also want to know a little bit, how is that different than using real-time leads? So where do we start here? How can you take us through what I need to do now, maybe adding aged leads, or if I'm just starting my book of business, how do I begin with aged leads?
Yeah, no, this is a great topic, and actually at Age Lead Store we have focused on this part. And if you come to our website, instead of seeing, hey, buy, you actually see a lot of sales training, because it does, just again, always being clear and transparent about the expectations. Age leads require a system. It's not the thing that's like real-time leads, where you're just kind of calling. That's your only technique. You definitely need some other tools to make this effective. So the way I always kind of open this a little bit, Bergen, if you just kind of give me a moment to be able to do the legal disclaimer, because I think it's so important. There are so many tools. Yeah, there's so many tools and techniques out there and tactics. All of them have a variety of different contexts where they can comply. So I always tell people when I go into this section that, I'm not your attorney, I'm not your general counsel, I'm not your compliance officer. Every one of your businesses, organizations, and sales operations are sort of uniquely set up. And therefore, I'm going to actually introduce you to approaches, techniques, and technologies, essentially what's available, and maybe even what's being used in a pretty routine way. But ultimately, the legality and the regulatory aspect of using any of these really kind of sits within your organization. So it's just important to kind of talk through that because there are a whole bunch of sort of spectrums here with this. But so let me just
Sure,
jump.
the application of the application of all these processes and these tools and technologies is important depending on your business and yeah, you can say the
Yeah,
rules around what you're doing. And I
yeah.
guess that also changes depending on where you live,
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Countries vary within the U.S. State by state. Often
Yeah,
varies on all of these topics. There's some very specific regulations around CCPA and TCPA and all those acronyms that are out there. So you have to explore all those sort of things. But yeah, it is really important to just kind of understand that these have to be done in context. And it's also kind of to your point, what you said is really how you actually implement the strategies. Because one of the downsides of having a large volume of leads and having a very effective technology is oftentimes if you don't match those up well, you can just simply make mistakes faster, right? And
right.
so you got to kind of think through these sorts of things. So.
Sure.
So let's talk about some of the specific techniques, I guess. Um, so one of the things that I like to do, particularly with age leads, because they're not coming into you in real time, they're not sort of in that intent zone, and it's not a live transfer, is I like to differentiate my techniques or my strategies between a cold or contact sort of lead management system and your more typical sort of CRM system or process. And they can be the actual same technology, the same piece of software, but really there's usually some utility to kind of keeping those lists and segments separate. So in that category of age leads, as you take the data file in, one of the things that we like to do is just very quickly, almost as quickly as you would in real time, get into contact with that individual and make them a part of your pipeline. And so, sort of the techniques that are available to you that tend to be very effective is simply kind of a three-step system and trying to make those three touches right off the bat. And so, oftentimes, we'll do something like an email or a text message or a voicemail. Sort of the order in which you do those can kind of depend. Often we suggest that you actually reach out to them via phone call, and then you always leave a voicemail. So that can be a drop of a voicemail is usually the most efficient because most of these people won't pick up. And you're simply leaving something like, and again, this should be in your age lead file. Hey, a couple months ago, you requested a rate quote online. We weren't able to connect. I'd love to reach out to you if you haven't gotten your auto insurance yet, or if you have any questions about auto insurance, or hey, you should consider us for a 6-month review or something like that. Immediately after that, hopefully, again, this starts to kind of kick in your automation, is to follow up with an email. Sometimes even on the voicemail, I'll tell them, hey, I'm going to send you an email with all my contact information. That makes that email sort of open and deliver better because they kind of heard you or they've seen you on your phone. And then the text
Right.
message is super effective. The response rate to text messages are so much higher. And again, the simple, hey, I'm just checking in on you is the best text message you can send.
All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
So then how do you then manage? So you've talked about the volume and putting these things in there. So clearly, again, it's a greater volume for the age leads, right? Is what
Yep.
you're suggesting. So what kind of system am I looking for then? If I'm, maybe a rep that's just getting into this, I'm new. What am I looking for? What do I need this system to really do for me?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean,
If
so
I haven't
you're
already asked that question already.
yeah, no, I mean it's an important question because I would say probably most of our clients at Age Lead Store um, you probably do it wrong, right? So they get the data file from us, which essentially is a CSV and converts very nicely into an Excel file, and they'll just go through that Excel file and they'll work it or call it. And all of those of us who have been in sales for a long time know that the two dimensionality of an Excel spreadsheet and that list looks good, but when you're trying to keep up on notes and follow up and everything, that breaks down very quickly. Even if you transition into your email, again, that breaks down very quickly. After like one or two follow-ups, there's no way you can find it or find out where you are in the process. So you have to have a CRM. You have to have those in a system that is actually designed for sales and designed for a lot of follow-up and a lot of different touch points and can keep track of all of those touch points and hopefully automate a good portion of that. Because like I said, at least 50% of that file is probably not at all thinking about insurance at this point in time. But the reason you bought them is when you put them in your book of business in your database, sometime over the next 6 months, there is a really high probability that they will actually purchase a new insurance policy in the next 6 months. And so it's all about whether or not you were the one that was following up with them. So you have to have a CRM system. Ideally, that CRM system will allow you, of course, to make phone calls, to efficiently respond to phone calls the way that most of them will get answered, which is a voicemail. And then, like I said, email is just kind of part of the game. But text messaging is probably your highest response rate. And so a lot of times when we're sending text messages, a lot of people are thinking, oh, people get upset, but actually what we found for the most part is people are actually appreciative of the text message. It doesn't ring their phone. It doesn't interrupt their meeting. It doesn't interrupt their day. It doesn't interrupt their dinner. It just simply comes in as a text message. They can take a look at it. They can choose to do something with it or delete it or to reply to you and say, hey, and again, this is why I like to keep it super simple is, hey, when's a good time to call you? And they can tell you. I mean, our number one response to initial text messages on age leads, the first one is, who are you and what is this about? Which usually we could follow up with a real nice, text message that said, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is Bill from XYZ Insurance, just following up on the rate quote that you asked for a couple months ago." And then they'll usually say, "Oh, okay," and then you can ask them, "Hey, when's a good time to call?" And so that usually goes pretty well. Or the second one is a lot of times they will respond to when's a good time to call, and they'll say, "Hey, why don't you call me tomorrow at 5, or why don't you call me before this, after I get off work, call me when I get home at 6, when I'll be there home with my spouse, or and we can kind of make the decision together." So that text message is super critical, and far less intrusive than most people sort of expect, especially if you do it in a good way.
Right. Okay, a question that kind of came to my mind as we're going through this a little bit, and about the cadence, really.
Mhm.
And it's it's an important part of sales. It's a really important part of insurance sales because generally the cadence is longer. It takes a lot more attempts to actually reach your prospect. And I'm just wondering if you've seen this, a sort of psychological advantage a little bit in calling the age leads versus the fresh leads. I'm thinking that, I've got this fresh lead come in and there's all this pressure to get a hold of this person. And so I've got to call, or contact or text. And this thing is literally aging in my hand. I'm watching it get old. And if I might call the 5 times, 6 times, I think you said it was maybe about a week, maybe 10 days or something.
Yep.
And then I give up.
Yep.
To me, it seems false because, okay, fine, now it's an age lead. It should maybe go to your age lead program. But if you're constantly on this fresh lead thing, you're constantly in this pressure cooker to do that. But if you've got some age lead program going on, you don't have to worry about it. They're in a kind of a nurture, they're coming, and then they'll sort of return back. And is there, I guess, a psychological advantage as a salesperson to be able to add
Yeah.
an age lead focus as well?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. There is some emotional and motivational advantages to age leads. In the real time scenario, again, your sales manager is looking at every one of those with big dollar signs in his eyes that, hey, I just paid $20 for that thing. You better turn it into a sale. You better call it, within seconds. The other thing that the individual salesperson, having worked both of these personally, um, the other thing that's happening there is because of that intensity that's applied by every organization that lead was sold to, the consumer is often agitated, frustrated. Someone, even if you call it within 30 seconds, you'll be shocked at the number of people that have beat you to that lead for a variety of reasons. And so the negative feedback ratio and the actual live feedback ratio that salesperson's getting on real-time leads, both from internal to the organization, sales director on my shoulder, and the consumer kind of coming out of the phone or email or even text message, is just really intense. And it really sort of puts a vice grip on the salesperson. And oftentimes, honestly, it's not the best experience for the consumer either. And so all that mixes together to really potentially demotivate a salesperson real quickly. To be honest, kind of about the experience on the age lead side, oftentimes there's not the level of intensity and pressure, but there are some negative feedback loops in that as well. And so that's why, again, you'll hear me over and over again say system, system, system. You got to have a CRM that does some automation for you, that takes care of some of this nurturing and allows you to kind of focus on the actual pipeline that you're working on and let some of this stuff happen, and let that consumer sort of come back to you using some of this automation, because really the negative feedback loop on age leads often is because people are working them wrong, right? So they're doing them just like a real-time lead, and they're taking the same approach. They're putting them in a call list. They're dialing through them. No one's answering the phone. No one's responding to their email immediately. And so they become demotivated because they're like, oh, nobody's paying attention here. And the truth is, really, they kind of are. And you don't need to actually dial them physically that much. You can let the email do some work. You let text message campaigns do some work. You can just let the voicemail drop sort of make you more efficient. And so just kind of mentally put yourself in there and let the consumer come back to you. But yeah, you take several of those pressure points like off the salesperson when you use age leads.
Right. Okay. And as you say, a system to be able to help you manage that cadence, bring it back to you, tell you kind of what to do, sort of let your brain free from all that stuff because it's being automated and managed for you. You just have to go, okay, it's time to call Bill again, see where they're in, or send them a text message, and then move on with my day to the next thing, and go maybe again after some of those more active sales processes in my pipeline. So I just that's kind of bringing me to my next stage here. Really, is now where do I get these leads, right? How do I identify the right place to buy these? What am I looking for? What needs to be in that data file you've talked about that makes these leads work for me versus I've bought something and I see some names and phone numbers, but ultimately it's just kind of junk because I don't really have what I need to make it successful.
Right. Yeah. So I guess, when we're talking about leads, even if you're talking about real-time leads, but age leads in particular, because it is a subset and a relatively small subset of the market as it pertains to leads and internet leads in general, is you're always looking for reputation of the actual provider, because they're lead generation is a big industry, and there's a pretty decent spectrum of kind of players in there, and so you want reputation. My very first filter, usually for a lead provider, is really, as with most products and services that you buy, take a look at the website. Make sure that there's contact information there. Make sure that you have the ability to talk to a person or a sales rep and really kind of talk about their product and understand what they're providing. And most importantly, kind of the top questions we always get asked is, where do these leads come from? And so how do they age? How are they originated? where do they come from, and generally you won't always know the sources. Again, sort of a lot of the sources and how they're generated is sort of the proprietary, secret sauce of the actual lead companies themselves. But they should be able to, as we've done even during this webinar, be able to articulate sort of in general, like, how do they come about, what makes them good, and kind of how they were done. So reputation, I think, is important. Some of that reputation, particularly on the age lead side, is also conveyed by how long they've been in business. Reviews, what other people have to say with them. If you're a captured agent, usually inside Allstate, inside of Farmers, inside of U.S. Healthcare, inside of any of these kind of companies where agents exist, oftentimes someone on your team or that you're affiliated with probably has some experience with the age lead providers that you may come across. So it's always important, I think, to sort of ask their opinion internal to those organizations of where do they get these age leads, who's the best one to do that with. So that's a great place to do that. Even independent agents can kind of share that. The other place that you're looking is sort of price. We often say, that there are no free lunches. So if someone's offering you a data file for just a remarkable price, $1 a lead, which is kind of about average, $1 and a quarter a lead, is pretty average on the age lead side of things. But if somebody's offering you, again, a free lunch or a data file, you should be a little bit suspicious of where that information came from or how it was originated. Again, ask good questions. The other thing that's usually definitive as to kind of a good lead provider is that they will talk about or can articulate to you what they're attempting to do. This is always a challenge, but what they're attempting to do to keep, even though it's aging, to keep that data as relevant, as accurate as possible. So usually they'll talk about data cleansing or hygiene, and the ways that they're kind of making sure that those records stay accurate. Inside of that file, that's kind of the second part of the question, like what should you expect inside the file? And you should be able to get a sample of what that data file looks like to give you a good understanding of what to expect in there. But usually they're very robust because most of age leads, and even your real-time leads now, are actually generated by what we call long form submission. So they actually ask a lot of questions. So inside of there should be the date when the request was made for the rate quote, of course the first and last name, a full address, a phone number. Oftentimes they will be a cell and a home. More and more times people just have cell phones. So you should have definitely a phone number on every single record. You should also have an email on every single record. Again, something that's often sort of a requirement of the form. Then the product that they requested the rate quote for, and I don't want to get into all the categories of leads, but if you don't have a product type in there, and if you're buying something like auto insurance, usually there's a make and a model. So can kind of sort out some suspicious lead providers if they don't tell you what the product they were asking for. So there's usually that kind of detail in there as well. So again, oftentimes there's 20 or so fields in that data file, and that's really important. And of course, where you get them from, we represent ageleadstore.com, and so we think we're a good provider. We also are the only ones that have a real-time store where you can actually filter and browse through the database and figure out how many leads are kind of available, and you can pull and purchase those in real time. Most age lead providers actually have to go back out to the real-time providers and look for what you're requesting. And whereas we're actually kind of creating a real-time marketplace, we're actually constantly buying those and adding them into the inventory based on demand. The other source, quite honestly, is the real-time providers. Some real-time providers will sell you their age data instead of selling it to people like Age Lead Store. So that's another place that you can find age leads.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's the first tip then, where you can go is age lead store. There you go. That's the first tip on the go to the last section here is where as we starting to wind down. What are some final tips? Top three things maybe people should keep in mind when they're getting into going after aged leads.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, age leads, like any lead type, is not a silver bullet, right? So it's
What?
going to take some work. It's going
I
to
need a
take some
silver
work,
bullet. That's what
right?
now this is all
I
about.
know. Exactly,
Okay, not a silver bullet.
exactly.
I got to still work. All right.
You have to do some work on them. Generally, that work means that you have to, again, have that software in place. You have to have the CRM sitting there to help you with that process. As I often say, salespeople never get burnout by being on sales calls with prospects. They get burnout by doing all of these non-productive activities. And curiously enough, most of those non-productive activities, like making calls they don't get answered, or delivering emails, or sending text messages, actually can be automated in a good way by leveraging the CRM system. And so that's kind of the second tip is really have that system doing some of those repetitive tasks that technology is really good at, so that you aren't putting yourself in that negative feedback loop for most of your day, and you're spending and this is for sales directors and organizations that have sales teams as well. You want that high dollar resource actually talking to customers, not just like hand manually sending out emails and text messages and stuff like that. So leverage
Right.
that. And then I guess the other tip around age leads specifically is the reason that you buy age leads really is to accelerate the actual growing of your book or your database of business. And that's really where it fits the best, because again, the affordability allows you to get the volume you need to really build up that database. And then we all know in sales that the database, the size of that database and the quality of that database is really what gets you consistently to your sales quota every single month.
Great. Perfect. Well, Bill Rice, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing all that information with us. It's been eye-opening, I think, for me anyway, to think that we can go after and really fill a gap that probably exists for everybody. And like you said, it's fill your funnel with
Yep.
really still some quality some quality leads, let's say quality leads that we just need to nurture properly to get them down to becoming a closed deal. And it's there, and it's not expensive. It's affordable. It's great for someone maybe who's just starting, and I don't have, a big book of business. I can't afford to buy $15 to $30 leads, but I can start with these and still make revenue if I'm patient, if I'm consistent, if I develop my cadence, I put the processes in place, and I follow through.
Totally. Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely
Great.
correct.
Now, Bill, how do we find you? If someone wants to track you down and talk to you some more, I know I mentioned before you're at the Age Lead store. You can go there and sign up for their newsletter, and that will give you insight into when you can see him on his webinars. And also, you can go to Kaleido to kaleido.com to find Bill. But where else can we find you?
Yeah, those are the two best places. Both of those places will get you on the newsletter, which is where I spend most of my time and kind of deliver the best of my strategies. The other place that I'm really active is on Twitter, and you can just find me. I was an early arriver at Twitter, so I'm Bill Rice on Twitter, and it's really easy to find, interact, share all kinds of insights there. Of course, link back to my other content, but yeah, if you want to have a conversation, I'm always on Twitter answering questions and giving you the best that I can.
Terrific. Well, again, Bill, thank you very much. We talked about what the heck are age leads and why should I care? Well, you know now why you should care. They're a great source of new revenue for you. So, Bill, thanks a lot. Good luck. And to all of you out there, good luck with your age leads.